Hi, I'm Greg Salmieri for the Salem Center, with the Salem Center for Policy, and we bring programming to campus on a wide range of issues. But one topic we keep coming back to at least once a semester is energy, because how we get our energy, how we provide energy for all the people in the world who need it is a pressing problem, and how we do it in a way that doesn't have harmful side effects is another pressing problem. It's that dual problem that's the topic of our talk tonight, the dual problem of energy for all and environmental protection on the journey to global net zero. We'll ask about that. We'll hear about that part of it. Our speaker tonight is Helge Haldorsen, who is speaking for the Switch Alliance, and has had a long career in the energy industry, which includes, I should mention, since we're here at the University of Texas, at an early stage, a PhD in reservoir engineering, right here from on the 40 acres. So thank you for coming, and everybody please welcome Helge Haldorsen.
Thank you, Greg. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. We're competing with the Energy Week downstairs on the first floor, but let's try to have a great time together anyway. So I think we'll agree on this premise. Human development depends on energy. I think over the last 200 years, we've seen energy correlate in a nice way with at least 100 things. You have seen all these plots of GDP per capita and this and that, right? So that's great if you're on the right end of that curve. What if you're down here, right, with not much energy, then it's not a good place to be at. So then we have to say there are 17 howevers, and that's called the Sustainable Development Goals. And tonight we're going to focus on two of them, number 7 and number 13, affordable and clean energy, and then climate action on a local level, but also climate change. Now, why is that important? Because there are 2.4 billion people without clean energy and cooking. So many do not have electricity, and 3.5 billion do not have reliable electricity. In Switch, we talk to people and students who come home, 125 Fahrenheit outside. They go in and want to do homework. They can't because there's no power, no air conditioning, impossible, right? So there are billions of people having a very difficult time. On the climate side, Lancet just showed us that 9 million people a year die from pollution, indoor pollution and ambient pollution, but 9 million a year. That's a lot of people, right, every year. And then you have, of course, greenhouse gas emissions. They keep going up. And there we go with climate change. I think temperature is up 1.1 degrees after 1750. And we're seeing effects of it already. Normally, most people only talk about the last one, the climate change, right? But we're going to talk about also those people with just about nothing. So over 250 years, we have built a tremendous global energy system. And if we're honest, there are pros and cons with every source of energy. We'll get to it, but even solar and wind has to do a lot of mining and processing and transporting. So before it's on your roof or on a spinning windmill, we have done a lot, right? That is not maybe so good. But it adds up to 600 quadrillion BTU of primary energy. That's what our global system can give. Quadrillion, that's 10 to the power 15, by the way. But since 80% of that energy comes from fossil fuels, oil, gas, and coal, it comes along with 38.4 gigaton of CO2. In addition, you have methane and NOx and other gases, but here we focus now on CO2. And that's a lot. So what do we have to do? We have to reduce the high emission energy sources. Coal is probably on top of that list, right? And then we need to ramp up the low emission energy sources like solar and wind and maybe nuclear, we'll talk about that. And we have to electrify things. And that means we need a lot of metals that we don't have today, right? So I could have put kind of 14 pages of stuff next to the green arrow to make that happen. We'll talk about it into the talk. And we need to synchronize the two. We can't take down what we have if we don't take up what we don't have yet, right? Because if we do, then we get just a series of energy prices with enormous high prices. And that doesn't just hurt OECD countries, the 1.5 billion that we can call the rich club of the 8 billion people on the planet. Because when gas and oil and even coal is very pricey, those who can afford it the least is, of course, developing and emerging nations. So they hurt even more than OECD countries, including Norway and the US. So the dual challenge that we have then with that backdrop is that we have to get energy for all. Those 2.4 billion with nothing would then die. And then we have to do environmental protection. Look at this lady cooking inside, right? Fumes hitting her. At the same time, we need to think about the planet. You know, we're all on the deck of spaceship Earth, but we need to have these two talks at the same time in our head. And most of the time, climate change is talked about, the blue spinning planet, right? But we're going to spend at least as much time on those with nothing today. So what are the key tags then for solving the dual challenge? I just put on some here. We're at an energy university today, so we have to have UT in there with all the good research being done here on policy, technology, and R&D. The energy industry is going to play a big role, I think, going forward. And then you have politics and policy, investments, technology, innovation, R&D, all the way down to you and me. And I had to add the motto for the energy week downstairs, stealing all the audience for us. What starts here energizes the world, right? Normally at UT we say what starts here changes the world, but this is about energy and the energy week. So that's a good backdrop to what we're going to talk about. So here's my outline. I have kind of said it already. An introduction. I always find it interesting to see what happened on this day in history. So I found something fun for you. Then we'll talk about 8 billion people on deck on spaceship Earth. What is the future then for oil and gas? What are the trilemma that you have to navigate when you're a nation and an oil company? And I'll try to define the new type of company, and I call it EMP 2.0. And then we have to talk about how do we solve the challenge, and then we'll have some takeaways. So here we are in Texas, McCombs and the Salem Center, and fasten your seatbelts. We are going to look for things to connect, and we're going to have fun too. Here are some dots we're going to find, and in the past, somebody turned them into something great, right? And one of my heroes is this guy, Steve Jobs. He says that creativity is just connecting things. But in order to have stuff to connect, you have to be curious. Curious people always find new things to connect, but if you're not curious, you're not interested in anything. You're just bored. You know enough about the world, right? My definition of innovation is to make unexpected connections between things. So my professor 43 years ago, Larry Lake, he's a very curious guy. So he knows a lot of green things. And every time I talk to him, you know, he wants to know more, so he picks up new stuff, and bang, he connects it, right? And he has a new idea. Then he can go to the meeting tomorrow, and he can say, why don't we try this? What if we did that? But if you're not curious, you have nothing to suggest, right? Because you didn't pick up new dots. This book by Adam Bryant shows how important this is. He interviewed 200 CEOs, and he wondered, how did they get to the corner office? What traits did they have that took them there? Can we find some common traits even that took that there? And look at that, what's on top? So I thought if I had the auditorium full of students, that would be a very important recommendation. Never stop being curious, right? Because that takes you to the corner office. So the energy transition is not about connecting the numbers for a faster horse. It's about finding new things to connect to solve the dual challenge. And I mentioned some already, technology, R&D, and innovation. I think collaboration is going to be more important than ever. We're in McCombs, so we have to mention investment, financing, and risk. Consumer behavior is important. And then rationality, politics, and policy. And the list could be much bigger. There's opportunity here, right? It's called creative destruction. Larry Fink says that we're going to see 1,000 new unicorns with the opportunities that is coming with the energy transition. I want to grab that word, rationality. We have a professor back here, Greg, in objectivity. And rationality is so important because it's the quality of being guided by data and reason. It's okay to have a feeling inside and a hunch and many things, right? But if you're rational, you always look for reasons why, strong evidence and data. And that's important when we go forward in the energy transition. You have to base it on something. So what happened on this day in history? Well, you had the Mrs. Scott competing with the Norwegian, trying to make it first, right, to the South Pole. And regrettably, almost, Amundsen won. And the last entry in Scott's book was the end cannot be far. And then he passed away on the way back, as you know, right? But what can we learn? Well, Amundsen, he prepared enormously compared to Scott. So failing to prepare is preparing to fail. And I thought that's exactly what happened a couple of weeks ago with this bank in California. People looking at that bank now, they can't believe how they failed to prepare for something that really could happen quite quickly. We can learn as much from our others' failures as we can from our success. All that gas from Russia going to Europe, we have seen that if you make yourself dependent on just one source of energy, not so smart. You need probably to diversify to be resilient and robust. I should have spoken here, as you know, on February 2, but because of ice and snow, it was cancelled. But I found some great things on February 2. I still want to share it with you. Treaty with Mexico, US and Mexico, ended the US-Mexican War, right, in 1848. And the red stuff you see there, that is the new territory that came into the US because of that treaty. And that was 529,000 square miles. Who was the president? Mr. Polk. And I think we need to lift him up, because if you look at the states that we list there, you find coal and hydro and wind and solar. It's kind of the heartland of energy for the US. So I think we need to start to call him the energy security president, right? And then just for completeness, I added in the Louisiana purchase, Alaska, Gadsden, the Arizona, New Mexico one, and the Florida from the Spanish. And it turns out that the US bought 50% of its 3.5 million acres for $50 million. He's a real estate law professor, and don't you think this was
It's a good deal.
It's a good deal, yeah.
Even if you round that up to modern equivalent.
Yeah,
Good deal.
exactly. Inflation adjusted. And the other one was him, Mr. Mendevin, who came up with the periodic table. He passed away. And the future is all about metals, right? So I think I made lithium blue, and I'm going to show you later how much more we need of so many metals going forward. It's almost to the point where lithium is the new oil. A Tesla S needs almost 8,000 batteries, right, to drive around in Austin. So I'm going to talk about Spaceship Earth, and I want to remind you of what we're doing right now. We are spinning around our axis, tilted 23 degrees at 950 miles per hour. We're doing that right now. And while we are doing that, we are going around the sun at 67,000 miles per hour. We are doing that now. And that speed is equal to 40 times the speed of a bullet. Is our velocity as we are in this room. And I just want us to get that big picture. If you send astronauts to space, even if they're Democrat or Republicans, they behave differently when they get up there and look back on the blue number 3 from the sun. They get what's called the overview effect. Spaceship Earth, they get an awe for it, and I have a responsibility feeling for everybody. So let's all be astronauts for a little while. Here is my proxy then of Spaceship Earth. Yes, it's a spaceship, but I made it into a ship. 8 billion people on board, and we have a leaky dome. Since the Industrial Revolution in 1750, we have already sent into that dome 1.5 trillion tons of CO2. So that is slowly leaking out, but CO2 takes thousands of years to get out. Methane a little quicker, as you know. And then on deck you have 195 nations and 8 billion people breathing the same atmosphere, right? Into which we put 1.5 trillion tons of CO2. Many of the people on deck do not have what we have to take for granted. Many lack affordable energy, as we talked about, and there are grave concerns on deck about pollution and climate change. What do all these governments want for their people? They want human flourishing and no poverty, energy security, clean air, and so on. Every leader of a nation, that's what they want. Who is the captain then of Spaceship Earth? Well, many are trying to be. The UN, IPCC, COP meetings, IMF, the World Bank, and particularly the IPCC is taking a holistic responsibility, issuing reports. And here is the chief of the UN saying, wow, this is code red for the death of Spaceship Earth. This is looking pretty spooky. And then last year in Sharm el-Sheikh, all the nations came together and the focus was on loss and damages, right? Because of the historic CO2 into the dome. And if you look at the 3 emitting the most from start to today, US is of course the one that sent up the most into the dome, 25% of historical emissions. EU almost as high, 22, and then China in 3rd place. So no, those nations on deck that have not polluted almost at all through history, they are saying, you have to compensate us for all the stuff you sent in already and the hurt we're going to have going into the future. So that was the big debate. And it's coming up again, of course, in COP28, which is going to be in the Emirates in November. CO2 is leaking out so slowly that we have to get it into tanks. So that's why we have to do CCS and direct air capture. And of course, UT is big on these 2 technologies. You have to actually suck it out of the air and get it into tanks. Otherwise, it's not a good place to be on deck of Spaceship Earth. Anyway, I hope you know I have a little different way of thinking about this. So here is the historic emission of CO2. Europe and North America is now on the way down. But look at China because of population growth and development, right? Look how big they are compared to everybody else. And look at 2 other continents, Africa and South America, almost emitting nothing compared to the others. And this is important. This is a time lapse by NASA. And what we conclude is that the mixing is so enormous that, you know, I have this from Scott Tinker, my boss. He says that CO2 doesn't have a passport. And now you see why, right? It's been mixed up whatever country it came from. It doesn't matter because it's under that dome and we all have to see it. So where is all the CO2 coming from? We knew it, of course, was power, industry, steel and cement in orange. It's from buildings, it's from transport, cars and planes and trucks, and it's from energy, when we produce the energy we produce. So we're going to go to net zero, so we have to get rid of all this, right? That's going to be an enormous job. And the ambition for the planet is what they call the Paris Agreement, where we hope to come in below 2, if we can below 1.5, and already we have seen plus 1.1. I'm talking Celsius now. I recommend this book to you if you haven't read it. It's called Speed and Scale. And of course, we could talk for 3 days about how to do this, but this is his recommendation for how to go from, when you add in methane and NOx and other greenhouse gases, you have to go from 59 gigaton to 0. And look how big the removed carbon is, the CCS, direct air capture at the end. But have a look at Speed and Scale. It's a wonderful book. So we have to do a lot of R&D, according to the IEA. They say that 75% of emission reduction rely on more R&D. And then a book came out a month ago from Stanford, Mr. Jacobson, and he's saying no miracles needed. We have 95% of the technology we need. You see the difference between those two? As I proceed to my talk now, it will become clear to you that on almost every issue in the energy debate and energy transition, there is this camp over here and that camp over there. But now most people say that the shape of things is such that there's no credible pathway to below 1.5. We're going to be heading for more than +2. The way you find out what to do R&D on is the green premium. So when you make a ton of cement or steel today, you have the black one, the high emission technologies. That's the cost per ton to make steel, with lots of emissions, right? If you want to capture all that emission, well, then that ton costs a lot more to make, right? And the difference between the two is called the green premium. Nobody wants to have that huge blue cost if you can do it, right, with the black one. So what can you do? You can R&D it down so that blue becomes on par with the black. You can slap on a tremendous CO2 tax, right? Then the two cost the same. And then the US just got the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, and they come up with something called 45Q that you might have heard about. And that is a tax credit that helps you. And that is also sending blue down to black. I'm going to mention quickly CCS. So in Norway, to emit a ton of CO2 is costing $93 per ton. In the US, it's 0, as you know. In 2030, the authorities have said we're going to ramp it up to $200 per ton. So all the players know that it's going to be unbelievably expensive, to emit a lot of CO2. You better do something else than that. So that incentivizes CCS. So we're not doing CCS in Norway to be nice. It's a commercial decision. You look at the net present value of not doing it, paying CO2 tax for 30 years to that tune, or putting on a CCS and re-injecting the CO2, then you get the NPV of that. And the NPV of that is winning over paying CO2 tax for 30 years. I won't bore you with this one. But what's really important is that when you have new technologies like blue hydrogen, CCS, floating wind, it's very costly out there, right? And you need to develop scale to get down the cost. So that was the case with the onshore wind and the solar. So high income nations like the US, they can pay the early adopter premium, as it's called, and scale it up and cut costs, and then we give it for free to those nations that you cannot do R&D. And what we see in Europe now, the Green Deal, the Green Deal industrial plan and the IRA are coming up with money for schools and for pilots and for demonstration plants to do exactly that. So the conclusion on this one is that I think in a Darwinistic sense, going forward and increasingly, the fittest are going to be the best collaborators, because you need company, private sector, government, academia, company A and company B. So I think that the fittest will be the best collaborators in the energy transition. So let's look at what people think about climate change. So this is the Pew Research asking people in 19 nations, global climate change is a major threat to my country, yes or no? And the mean on the bottom is 75. But one of the lowest is in the US with 54. Only 54% of, this was in 22, people in America feels that global climate change is a major threat. And I have heard many times that energy is political. And if you look at Republican-leaning people, you're down to 11%. Think this is important. And then Democrats, what does it say, 66, 65? So it's very political. If you look at the young, 18 to 29, versus the old guys like me, we knew that that would be different, right? But look how political energy really is, right? Because when it comes down to it, it's decisions and policy that will, together with technology, determine where we go. So where do people get their opinions then? Greg and I talked about this a little before we started. There are loads of books out there saying climate change is a hoax. It's just something somebody came up with to earn money. It doesn't exist. The data isn't really showing temperature going up. We don't believe this stuff. Even people in high places, without naming anyone, is saying that, right? So many people read these books and they say it's just a big hoax. Then you have those on the complete opposite side saying it's already too late. This planet is burning up and there's nothing we can do, right? Then you have this type of headlines, the uninhabitable Earth. Then Greta just came with a book and she said, I want you to panic. And her countryman, I would really recommend this book. If you haven't read Factfulness by Hans Rosling, you need to. And he's saying in there, there's no room for facts and our minds are occupied by fear. So he is disagreeing with this girl from Sweden. And then the last one is very good. There's no innovation needed to end poverty. We know what to do. And I think finally on the book front, you have Björn Lomborg. I think he was speaking in this room 3 months ago. Did any of you listen to him? Yeah, great. Okay, great. And he has a book called False Alarm. And he's saying that, yeah, we have climate change, but we can R&D it so that we take down the cost of renewable. So it becomes less than oil and gas, and then it will both compete oil and gas. And by the way, we can adapt if water comes up or something happens. We can adapt and fortify. And then you have Steve Koonin, Unsettled. He has looked at the IPCC data about what happens to the planet as we go to higher temperatures. And he says it's not really that clear that life will be so horrible going forward. That's why he called the book Unsettled. So climate change, yes, but they have a different view on it. So now we are in 23, and we're heading for 2050. It's a lot of talk about 2050. So I just wanted to share with you what's going to happen between now and then. We're going to add about 2 billion people. So that means every year we add 75 million customers for energy. 75 million new customers on planet, on deck that wants energy. Energy demand goes up. It varies between plus 30 to plus 60. I'll just put 50. The global middle class grows with about 140 million people per year. Now we have 1.4 billion cars. I think it's going to double by 2050. Will they be electric or will they run on gas? Percent of living in cities is going up. But look at the last one. We have to add the New York City per month the next 40 years to keep up with population growth. So that's the outlook then. And look at that curve with how many people on deck. In economic terms, since we are on McCombs, the GDP today of all the nations, if you add them up, is about $100 trillion. And we're running it about 80% on fossil fuels, on coal, gas, and oil. And that means 100 million barrels per day. So today, on March 29, we used 100 million barrels. And we used 400 billion cubic feet of gas, and 20 million tons of coal was burned today. And then in 2050, the world economy, I think, will be around double, more than $200 trillion. And the ambition then is to run it on net zero. Remember that 59 gigatons has now been taken down to zero. And it took us 200 years to build the system we have today. And now we have 27 years, to have an industrial revolution almost and do it over again. And the cost of that, estimates vary, but between $3 and $9 trillion per year to come to net zero by 2050. So in economic terms, very heavy lifting going forward. And now we're going to meet Sanu Kanji in South Sudan. Here she is. She spends hours finding firewood, water, and for the family. Then she does indoor cooking, and look where the fumes go to her and her children. Indoor pollution, no time to have a job, to get an income, to lift the family out of poverty because she has to do this. No time for education, and very often too large a family, right? And even if people don't live exactly like this, it's about 2.4 billion people with not clean cooking, right? And this type of life. So let's imagine just for a second that we have no safe and reliable energy. No smartphone, no computer, no TV, no nothing, right? No car, no appliances, no internet. What kind of life would that be, right? Not very good. This is a map of the income across the world. And let's focus just on the blue part, right? That's kind of the OECD countries, the 1.5 billion with a high income around the world. And it's not that many blue areas. It's North America, Europe, Japan, part of Australia, a little bit Middle East. And then let's look at where we have the worst, or let's first the best air to breathe. That's the green areas, right? And they correspond to the blue areas that we just saw. They can afford to clean up the air, right? And the others cannot. And this one just came out a couple of days ago. And since I'm in this business of looking at the global world, I thought, wow, if you look at kind of the happiest people, there are many questions in this survey. But don't you agree? It kind of corresponds to the green and the least pollution and the blue with the highest income. They are now also the happiest people, right? And you would expect so. Pollution. So Lancet is a very respected authority on numbers with medical problems. And they came with a study last year saying that 9 million people a year is dying from pollution, indoor and ambient pollution. I Googled John Hopkins, now they have shut down that keeping track of how many people die from COVID. But when I checked them at the end of February, it was 6.8 million people that died over 3 years globally. And just remember how all the nations teamed up to find a vaccine with trillions of dollars and R&D and cooperation, right? So we were able to stop it. But look at 9 million next to 6.8 million. They're both horrible, right? But that's a lot of people, dying from pollution. So if you look at the numbers, the indoor pollution from this type of indoor cooking is 2.3 million in 2019. And the ambient pollution, for the reasons I list below, was 4.5 million people dying prematurely because of pollution. And this is also code red. So what can we do then for this lady in South Sudan? We can probably not leapfrog straight to renewables, right? We go from dung and wood straight to solar and wind. It's possible some places in India, in fact, they have done that. She might have to start with LPG, propane, like we used when we went camping in the mountains. Much better than what she has here. Still fossil fuel, but much better. And then even a grid electricity coming from coal is better for her than what she has here, right, in that nation. So when we say we, meaning OECD countries, say to developing and emerging countries, you shouldn't use coal. Well, what did we use to get up to where we are now? 200 years of coal, right? So should we deny them the chance to do it? So I think what we have to do in high-income countries is to provide cheap capital. We have to do the R&D that we talked about, do the early adopter premium, scale to lower the cost, and then give it for free to these nations. and then help them also with the supply chains. We have a big responsibility, I think, for global solidarity. So to sum up this part, I have 8 billion people on planet Earth on the right side, and right now 80% of the primary energy is coming from coal, gas, and oil. On the other side, we have dung and wood, spending hours to find it. So what we're trying to do then globally is to go from higher emission to lower emission fluids. And nuclear, of course, is back in the discussion. That used to be, don't even mention it. No, every nation I know of is talking about it. And we'll see soon why. And again, the goal over here is to come in below 2, below 1.5 if we can, for the planet as a whole. However, greenhouse gases keep going up, temperature keep going up. The chief of the UN keeps saying almost every week that it's code red, this is not good. Over here then we have our 2.4 billion people that need affordable and reliable energy. And the goal is to get both poverty and energy poverty down to 0. And these people have done little to make climate change where we are now. And they are suffering, I showed you, with pollution. So this is just about as much a code red as the other one when you think of the globe as a whole. We talked about the costs over there, 4 to 9 trillion. According to the IEA, to lift 2.4 billion away from this way of living is costing 4 billion per year. And that's less than 1% of the other one, right? So shouldn't we do it then? If you want to know more about what it is like to live in a place with almost nothing or with unreliable energy security, have a look at this one from Switch, where we work. It's called The Switch On. It's a 1-hour movie with Scott Tinker and director Lynch. And I think it's a wonderful investment in time to have a look at that one. I think I'll skip a couple of slides for you. This is just showing how we didn't have an energy transition. We just added stuff, right? We didn't go from biomass to coal only, and then to gas, and then to oil, and then to this, and then to that. We just use more of everything. In fact, we use more coal today than we did 30 years ago, right? All-time high. So we shouldn't have called it energy transitions in the past, because we just added stuff, right? No, we're really going to go from molecules to electrons. That's a different deal. But here is the state of the world. We're using, this is from 2019, 82% of primary energy is coming from those three, green, red, and gray. Renewables are on top here. Look how tiny they are. They're growing quickly, but from a small base. And here we look at what is the safest and what energy source is emitting the least CO2 per power unit generated. And the reason nuclear is back in business is that even if you add in Chernobyl and Fukushima, they almost beat all the other ones on safety, number of deaths per kilowatt hour or mega or gigawatt generated. And if you look on the other side, they are the lowest when it comes, is it 3 tons CO2 per power unit generated? But of course, the other side of that coin is NIMBY, not in my backyard. What do we do with the waste? Why does it take 10 years of permitting? Why does it cost so much, right? So there's a lot going on there, but what I'm seeing in almost every nation now is a full rethink on nuclear energy. So what about oil and gas? Well, if you want to go to net zero, according to the IEA, we have to cut it down by this much when it comes to gas, oil, and cost. And they're saying we cannot start any new oil fields. We have to stop exploration immediately. And if you look at what's going on today as we speak with exploration, that is not what's happening. People are exploring all over the world to find more oil and gas, right? Remember that down with the red and up with the green, and how we have to synchronize? If we don't have enough, right, before the green can ramp up, well, there goes prices. Many companies look out what is the error bar in the forecast. And this company, I used to work for Equinor, they have two scenarios. One is called the wall scenario, just small incremental changes, right? And here we're plotting global gas consumption versus time. And on this scenario, we just need more gas in 2050 compared to what we use today. But if you have the other one, almost like a backcast, what do we have to do to come in below 2 degrees? Look at that one. Then we need 75% less of what we use today. And peak gas is just 2 years from now. In the other one, peak gas is in 2041. So many of us have to forecast, and we know about error bars, but that's a big error bar, everybody. And the truth is probably in between somewhere, right? Some kind of mean case between them. And the headwinds and the tailwinds, a long list as usual, that can take us to the high one, or can take us to the low one. We have to see. I just looked at BP. They came out 2 weeks ago with their forecast, and it's just about the same. They have 3 scenarios, but the span is pretty similar to that one. If we look at oil, we just discussed that we're using 100 million barrels per day, every day in 23. And in scenario 1, we just go down a little bit, right? Down to 80 or something. In the other scenario, we're down to 20-ish, 25 million barrels a day. And why is that? Because of electric vehicles. Electric vehicles don't need oil, gas to run them, right? What is BP saying? Just about the same. And here is a plot from Rystad Energy. And if you look at the blue, so ISTEN is internal combustion engine, and the other one is battery electric vehicles. And this company is pretty bullish on the penetration rate, the uptake of BEVs going forward globally. And if this happens, we go from 30 million barrels a day of those 100 that we use going to cars to less than 10, 7, 8, right? So you have a demand destruction of about 25 million barrels a day if electric cars take on to the tune of what they are showing here. But batteries has to be made from something. And here I'm just showing to make one EV battery, which is 540 kilo in a Tesla, with almost 8,000 small batteries in it. Look at all the metals that you need to make it, right? Different metals mined in different places of the world. And look at the 200 kilo of plastics, rubber, and textiles coming from what? From gas and oil, right? So that's kind of gas and oil that you don't burn. You use it to make stuff that we all need, right? The cover on our cell phone, or I can make 1 million products where you need it. But look at the bottom line. You need to dig up 200 tons of earth just for one battery, right? So this one I have from Scott, but this is showing a Tesla S. And about 7,000 batteries per car. Today we have 1.4 billion cars that we talked about. And let's say that 50% of them should be electric as we get more cars. We're going to 2 billion cars in 2050. So then we need 4.9 billion batteries. So we need 250,000 batteries per minute for 37 years. That is the tune of batteries that we need. So who is using the most minerals then? On top you have an electric car, and you see the chemical symbol for what we're talking about. Copper and cobalt and nickel, and then look at the conventional car. Much more goes to the electric car. If you also look at generating power or electricity, you also see there, who is using the least? Natural gas and coal. Nothing compared to wind, onshore and offshore, and photovoltaics. And if you add it up then, you see you need 40 times more lithium being produced globally in 2040 compared to what we have today. Where are the batteries made? Only 8% of all the batteries produced globally is not made in Asia. And that is then China, Japan, and Korea. Just 8%. What if they all of a sudden say, oh, can't have any batteries? Well, and who is making the solar panels? Every step of the way, the polysilicon, the solar cells, and the modules. China mostly, right? The average of that is about 80%. You can't see it, right? But here I'm adding in many other things, electrolyzers, heat pumps, and so on. And red is China. China is wonderful, but look how they have cornered the market for so many things that we need going into the energy transition, right? This is where the minerals are coming from: lithium, rare earth, and so on. Quite diverse, with the Congo, big cobalt, and so on. And look at where they're processed. They're transported all the way to China to be made into something, and then they transport it back to be used on roofs and different things, other places in the world. So we're having a complete globalization rethink. Will we see a lithium OPEC, to put it that way, right? The four biggest nations with lithium say, we control this market, we're going to make a job, we're going to set the price, right? That could happen with nickel, cobalt, and all the other ones. I won't read that for you, but the conclusion is that somebody else has the lead at the moment. Financial Times looked at how many new mines do we need then to come up with all that new metal I just showed you. Look how many for the different metals. 70, 60, 72, 108. And I understand, talking to mining people, that to open a mine somewhere is an enormous exercise with permitting and this and that. So from the first spade going down to the first metal going out can quickly be 10 years, apparently, for most of this type of mines. So do the experts agree on this? This is a wonderful guy from the Manhattan Institute. His name is Mark Mills. We had an energy switch episode with him that you should see. And he's saying total investment energy metals 1/10 of what we need. And then another school we've heard of, MIT, they have a publication called Technology Review, and they're busting myths. 3 myths. I just took one of them. And myth number 1, we don't have enough materials to build what we need to fight climate change. We do have enough materials to power them all, right? So totally disagree with the one I just showed you, Mr. Mills. Carlos asked me also to include something about the oil price. And I have been 45 years in the business. I haven't even been close to being right on the oil price. When I think it goes high, it goes low, and vice versa. So I have concluded that the oil price between today and 2050 is going to be boom and bust, like it always has been. And the question is, where are we compared to going up or going down? Are we here? Or are we on our way down to 43, right? I think it's 78 Brent today. Is it 100 in 2 months, or is it 40? But most companies are saying, we can't bet the house. We have to hedge, or we have to assume a price that we can survive on for some time. But sorry, it's going to be more boom and bust. So the outlook is that we need oil and gas for decades. There's a big uncertainty bar in terms of how much. The way you hedge is that you're in what we call advantage basins, and you produce barrels that are resilient. That means that you have a low carbon intensity. That means kilo CO2 emitted per barrel produced. If you have that, your barrels could be the last ones that the world do not need. But if you are emitting loads of CO2 for every barrel produced, that could be the first one to shut in because the CO2 tax is so high. So let's look at countries. But first, Mike Tyson. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, right? And what punches have we gotten lately? Well, here is a list. It could be much longer, right? But the big one was, of course, COVID and supply chains, shutting down, inflation, interest rate, and of course, Russia invading Ukraine, stopping gas going to Europe, everything becoming more expensive for everyone. We got really punched in the face, including the 2.4 billion I showed you earlier. So since 2015, we have focused on sustainability. Then we tried to, remember in 2014, the oil price was $120 a barrel, and we had to get down the cost to make it more affordable. But after that invasion by the Russians, the main focus now is on energy security. You know, we really have to make sure we have enough, you know, so we don't turn into the Flintstones, so to say. So it may be easier to balance security, affordability, and sustainability with a mix, with a diversity of energy sources, right? So if you have trouble over here, it works super over here. All your eggs in one basket called gas and pipeline from Russia, probably not so smart. And I think maybe in time, down the road, renewables could score high on this tree, right? Compared to what we have today. And maybe it becomes the #1 driver of the energy transition. Again, back to Rista, they are showing in this scenario how we go from what we have today, 82% oil and gas and coal, to 2100 in fact, but let's go to 2050. In this scenario, we have 77% renewable. They're not saying this could happen, it's just one of many scenarios. But that's local energy, so something interesting is happening, right? Right now, you have about 75,000 ships globally on all the oceans going somewhere with LNG and oil and ammonia and coal, right? 62% of global, and they see kind of are exposed to a global price. If everybody goes to solar and wind and stuff at home, then energy is becoming mostly local. So if you're kind of sitting on all these ships that might not be needed, right? You still need to move metals around or something, but nothing compared to what you do now. This is kind of non-linear thinking showing up. You need to maybe behave or do something based on what the future could look like. Energy companies, so that was nations. Now we got energy companies. What should they do? Should they just continue producing oil and gas? Should they build a new portfolio? And at the same time, they have to deliver what we call a competitive capital distribution. Otherwise, we don't want to invest in them. They have to do all these three things, right? Tremendous balancing act. I could have talked about that for an hour, but I won't. So they have to decide, do we stay in this bowl, or do we go into something new that we haven't done before? And companies are choosing differently. Some companies are saying, business as usual. We're changing absolutely nothing. We're trying to be better at what we do, cut costs and so on. Some decarbonize. So Exxon and Chevron is saying, you know, we want to cut scope 1 and 2 emissions. And they do a lot on that, and they invest in CCS and hydrogen in addition. The European majors diversify. Most of them go into solar and wind, in addition to the oil and gas that they're doing already. And Ørsted, that you might have heard of, they sold all the oil and gas. Now they're only doing offshore wind, earning loads of money. So they call that full transition. So every company needs to decide, you know, what club do we want to be in, right? And get the shareholders to go with them. So I said I talk about E&P 2.0, and on top, you kind of see where I'm going. This is in the Permian, and you see a solar plant next to an oil plant, right? And that's happening now. And below, you see it's very high tech. So people working in the oil industry has to change the skill set that they have. The leadership is different, the strategy is different. We talk about policy, business models, everything is kind of changing right now. So what do they need to know? That circle around 2 heads down there. What do they need to know now that they didn't need to know when I went and did my PhD with Dr. Lake? They need to know cloud computing, digitalization, sensors everywhere, real-time data, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and so on and so on. And they need to know the new lingo. If you come from UT now and you don't know what scope 1, 2, and 3 is, sorry, not good enough, right? So it's a new world out there in terms of the competence that you need to do well out in the industry. And when it comes to talked about the top level that you need to know. When it comes to leadership, I showed you it's a much more uncertain world. There's more tension in the world than it used to be with geopolitics. And I think we need, look at the last line, a lot of non-linear thinking. You can't just go for a faster horse. You have to go for a car, right? That's non-linear. But I think that attracting top talent is going to be tough for the industry unless the perception they radiate change a bit, right? Young people, you saw the score they had. They don't like the oil and gas business. They don't want to join it. So we shouldn't greenwash, but we have to admit that the opportunity set in a company now, I can come in as a restaurant engineer, I can develop fields with low carbon intensity, then I can go to offshore wind, I can go to hydrogen, I can do many fun things that I couldn't do before. So it's a much better opportunity set, and the skills are transferable, in my view. Scott Sheffield is the CEO of Pioneer in the Permian. And I just went to his Q4 presentation to the market. And I want to share with you two things. He is investing in wind in the Permian to generate power. He is investing in a solar plant in the Permian to generate power. Why is he doing that? To lower his scope 2 emissions, right? You never saw that before. What is the new KPI he's reporting on? The carbon intensity, that is the kilo CO2 per BOE produced that I talked about earlier. You never saw anyone include that before, a US independent. And they're doing great. Look. I went to Hess and looked at their sustainability report. And I showed you in the beginning of the talk, the 17 SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. Well, look how Hess, a US independent, right, is referring back to how they're assisting the SDGs to come true, right? On every page of that sustainability report from Hess, they are showing how it agrees with, you see number 13 that we talked about earlier. So I could have started my talk on this section with their bride and groom. 40 years ago, they talked about a digital oil field. But I have now shown you that E&P is marrying new technologies, digitalization, decarbonization, low carbon, and renewables even, right? So congratulations. Finally, we see a new type of E&P company out there. Yeah, I don't think we have to do the takeaways. I just want to share this one. In 1894, you had the horse manure crisis. You had 100,000 horses in New York and 50,000 horses in London. And 1 million pounds of horse manure each day in London. And the stink and the everything, right? So the Times said in 50 years, every street in London will be buried under 9 feet of manure. We can't even live in cities anymore. We have to move to the country, right, where this is possible. And then, here is year 1900, Fifth Avenue. It's called Spot the Car. Thousands of horses, right, but one car. And then just 13 years later, the same street on, I think, First Easter Day, Spot the Horse, right? So isn't it amazing how quickly that went from one to the other? So that shows that transitions really can be quick. I already gave you that quote. It's such a wonderful quote, right? If I asked people what they wanted, everyone would have said a faster horse, linear thinking. And then he had a non-linear thinking, and his car was a green solution to the horse manure crisis that saved all the big cities, right? And the key here was innovation, assembly line, low cost thing that people could afford. I just wanted to include this picture. I just find it so fascinating. Look at the one on top from 1856 and the one kind of lowish. There's nothing in one that is still in the other. Right? So it just tells me it's just unbelievable what we can do as humans to change it slowly. If you have the time lapse between the first and the second, but we can do many things. ICE to EV. That's like going from horse to ICE car, known as ICE to EV. So who has the highest penetration rate? Norway is now having 90% of cars sold in Norway are electric. 90. And then you see the others compared to it. Why? Because we are a rich nation and the perks are costing a fortune, right? There's no import duty. You drive in the HOV lane, you charge for free. You don't have to pay when you drive into the city, the other cars do. And the power is coming from hydropower, not from coal, because that'd be an oxymoron if you have an EV car coming with electricity from a polluting coal plant. And we have a good network for charging. And we plan to phase out ICE cars by 2025. The EU just decided, I think this week, that 2035, they will not sell normal cars anymore. So India and China and many other nations cannot afford what Norway has done. This is not the model for almost normal nations. But the subsidies that the authorities in Norway was willing to put in to ramp up electric cars is unbelievable, very costly. So we have to accelerate then the decarbonization. So here we are showing what type of energy they are using in the different places of the world. Look in Asia, look at how green the coal and oil is, right? That's what they're running that biggest part of the world on. I think 4.7 billion or 8 billion is behind that. So if you make it proportional to where people live, look at the big one in Asia. And you see that, for example, Europe, coal and oil is half green there, dark green. And you see North America about the same, right? So then people say we have to get rid of oil and coal. Okay? And here we are. And then many people don't like gas and nuclear either. Okay? Then we are here. That's going to be a lot of lights going off around the world on deck of a spaceship Earth, right? So it's an enormous job to come up with something else. And that takes us to a concept called energy density. And that illustrates why it's so difficult to go from fossil fuels to something else. Energy density is the watts generated per square meter or cube. I have so many measures. I'll just pick this one. So the high one is over there, and the low one is over here. This we call renewable, this we call fossil. Some people call it other things, but this is intermittent, and that is dispatchable and reliable. Now here we go. Some call that clean, and some call that dirty. But look at wind and solar, how low energy density they have. Almost a factor of 100 compared to the other ones, right? So I want to do an experiment with you. So last year, you see the generation of electricity from coal was 10,042 terawatt hours. If you add up all the electricity generated by coal, that was how much. And that has to go to zero if we want to come in below 1.5 degrees in 2040. If that goes to zero, that means something else must pick up and make the same amount of electricity, right? So how many windmills do we need to make the same amount of electricity? How many roofs with PV do we need to do it? So I took the average value for everything, something called the capacity factor and the size of the windmills, and we need 650,000 windmills to generate the same. So that's 420 onshore windmills a week for 50 years to deliver the same amount of power that coal did. And then offshore wind, of course, is a little bigger, but that's just embryonic. It hasn't really started much yet. And solar roofs, we need 660 million of them. So we have to do 36,000 roofs a day to come up with the same amount of power. Solar farms is helping us, of course, a little bit as well. But we're not really recycling yet. So after 25 or 30 years, we're going to dig it down. This is not very good. So, and it's intermittent, right? And that means we have to invest an enormous amount of battery and storage so that during the night when we don't have sun, or the wind isn't blowing, and we still want to not use candlelight to do the homework. But I think you just see what it takes, just to substitute something with low energy density for what we are using now. In Switch, we believe in critical thinking and civil dialogue. And I have said all along tonight that there's pros and cons with every type of energy. If you are really honest and look at the lifetime or cycle assessment for any energy source, so you are mining stuff, you are crushing the rocks, you are transporting it over here, you're sending it to China, it comes back and so on. Then of course every energy source has a lot of CO2 as well, and problems with the mining and so on. But now you can compare one with the other, right? So I can't stress enough how important it is to do life cycle assessment of every energy source, so you can do a factful and honest comparison between alternatives. So energy is very complex, full of dilemmas, not binary. We have to be objective professor back here, and there are pros and cons with all of them. And the transition is going to be slow, and the velocity of it is going to be different in every country. And if you want to see this on the one hand and on the other hand, have a look at Energy Switch episodes. They're on PBS, and Scott Tinker is having a discussion with somebody who's for something or against something, very interesting, and then he sums up at the end. So almost done, but like Steve Jobs, one more thing. We don't get the chance to do that many good things, so you have to be burning for something, a wrong that you want to right. So back to that global picture of energy, right? This is energy at work, improving people's lives. Just imagine if we didn't have it. But there are challenges too. And we talked about emissions, pollution, climate change, and energy poverty that we have to fix. But clearly, if you work in the energy industry and you make it available, affordable, reliable, and sustainable, you can put this in your CV, changing the world for the better. And Greg, I put you in instead of Carlos. This is me and Greg here at McCombs 11,000 years ago. And Greg says to me, "Hey, look at that moon, I wish we could go there." And I said, "Greg, are you crazy? We can go to the moon. All we have is flint arrowheads," which was true. That was the most high tech in Texas and on the planet at that time. And then we did. Right? So when you have these two next to each other, you get that almost goosebump feeling for what mankind can do, right? Even coming from a difficult place. But it takes big dreams, vision for the future, and leadership. So I think we can do this. I'm confident we can do this as we go forward. So another March 29th, Nelson Mandela is acquitted of treason, and he has this wonderful quote: "It only seems possible until it's done." So we have on our hands a generational challenge. That's to 2050, to 2100, right? To do well for the planet. But the more shorter term, we can't accept that so many people have so little energy and so much poverty, right? And we need to be able to think about those two things at the same time. So summing up then, energy education is really important because energy is so complex. And to navigate energy in a good way, you need to know what to do. We need to have global solidarity and cooperation. Critical thinking and civil dialogue is super important. Most of the time we end up with a trade-off because two sides can't agree, and I showed you how many things they don't agree on. Courage in politics and ingenuity in policy is very, very important. So we elect people to run things. They have a view on energy and energy transition, and that comes back in policy. ENP 2.0, I talked about. We have to do a lot of R&D and innovation and scaling up. And consumer behavior is increasingly important. Consumer also being companies and governments and you and I. And finally, a diverse energy mix and supply chain is much more robust than just a pipeline of gas from Russia. Just one thing you turn into no light if you don't have it. So stealing from Scott, there are no simple solutions. It's all solvable if you act as one team. So no, they should play Fleetwood Mac. Don't stop thinking about tomorrow, because it doesn't. The future is not a gift, it's an achievement. So thank you from the fjords of Norway, and that's all, folks. Yeah, any difficult questions? Any comments?
I agree with your ending there. But to get there, you're saying that we have to have civil dialogue, and we have to have acting together in teams to get us there.
Yeah.
And I am seeing not that. But specifically about energy, I don't know that we're seeing civil dialogue, because in order to have a dialogue, you have to have a conversation that is genuine between people.
Yeah.
And politics have gotten so skewed, I'm not sure exactly the right word. People are not talking about what their real motivation is. And so how can I have an agreement with you when we can't agree on what our goal is? Because my goal as a politician is to get my ass reelected.
Yeah,
if I have to lie, cheat, steal, scare you into something that is irrelevant, I'm going to do that. And how do we get over that hurdle? You're absolutely correct. We need to have these direct conversations with agreed facts, but we can't agree on what the facts are, and we can't really agree on what the goals are, because so many people are hiding their goals. Okay.
That's a good question.
That's very pessimistic.
I saw a guy once said, that's a good question. I wish you didn't ask it. So I'll start with a coalition approach to running a country, as we have in many European countries. So nobody wins. It's not a Democrat or Republican wins Senate or Congress. There's the biggest party, but in order to get the majority, they have to team up with 3 parties, for example. So they go to a hotel for a week, and they put aside everything they disagree on, and they come back with these 10 things we're going to do the next 4 years. Right? We're going to hold hands, even if we have 4 different parties. It's called a coalition government. Right? So then they execute that for the best of the nation. When I look at Washington, I'm just a guest, right? And I'm non-political and non-partisan. The closest metaphor I can get is a bumper car arena. You know what? All the cars are crashing all the time. And I think that if they had the same sentiment in Washington as coalition governments in many countries, they would put aside stuff they disagree on, make a list of 5 big ones they agree on, and then this nation has so much ingenuity, that you would, all the red stuff that we saw in Asia, that would be probably in the US, right? So I wish there was a way to tell people, agree on 5 things and then execute, and then put the other stuff aside. But it doesn't seem to be possible. And I've also seen what you say, that if you come from a coal state and somebody threatens 100,000 people working in coal in that state, you will be against it. Otherwise, they won't re-elect you for another term in Washington, right? So unless the government comes in and with this serious program to re-educate.
This is your point about policy courage. Somebody's got to have some courage.
Some courage,
I don't have to be reelected. I'm willing to say to you that we need to make some changes and do things differently. I'd love to see some of that. I'm not seeing.
No. Kennedy wrote a book when he was 22 called Profiles in Courage. That'd be a thin book, I think, today. So I agree with you. Yes, sir.
But I don't know how realistic a parliamentary system is in the US. That seems unlikely. I don't think you need it. I think you can do something as simple as, say, rank order voting, which disincentivizes heading for the extremes.
Right.
That seems like it'd be profitable. Different topic though. So you mentioned Bjorn was here not that long ago.
Yeah, did you listen to him?
I did.
Yeah.
My takeaway from his talk was that if we were to rank speaking of rank ordering, if we were to rank order sort of the highest ROI investments in terms of eliminating human suffering now and in the future, changes in energy would be pretty low on that list. So can you convince me that the costs are low enough and or the benefits are high enough that we should be doing things like eliminating coal as opposed to spending that time and effort eliminating some of the other stuff we talked about, like indoor cooking with dump?
So I didn't talk much about climate change today. I just talked about the Paris Agreement. And
you talked a lot about changing energy.
But changing energy.
Which I assume was the same thing.
And then I'm thinking mostly about the dual danger, you know, the Sanji inside with the fumes, 2.5 million people a year. And we must help those people so they don't die from cooking food. Right? And the other one was 4.5 million outside. And that often comes from the power plant, maybe running on coal, with soot particles, right, in that city, not being good for people. So when I say that we should go to lower emission sources, I'm thinking on the pollution, but I'm also looking ahead, you know, with the temperature going up. Because Unsettled, that book by Kunin, is not saying that we won't have you know, heat that kills people in nations and more hurricanes and drought and all this stuff, right? He's just saying we don't quite know, right? But I believe that the reason is there and it's heavy enough because of the burden of so many people suffering and dying prematurely, right? Even leaving the other part out.
Yeah, that you say those two things as if they're consistent with one another. They strike me as a contradiction.
No, not really, because it's a dual threat. If you think about it, the dual threat is that you get pollution and people dying from it. And Kunin saying that there is an error bar, but climate change and increasing temperatures could have sea level come and take you, and this could happen and that could happen. So we'd be bordering on an insurance policy, even if you have a big error bar. Okay. Yep. Thank you. Yes, sir.
I think it was on the feed that I was browsing that I saw this information. So please clarify. Natural gas, it was the highest energy capacity substance that we have access to. It was the one that we found first. And we're running out of that, right? I mean, we're running out of it, but we're running out of that at a much faster rate than coal, for example. And I think that's not the question. I think part of the implication of not acting now is to wake up 30 years from now with no coal, and then realize, oh wait, we can't run everything with solar panels because we can't run anything with solar panels right now. We can only use coal. So I kind of use that as an opportunity. But,
yeah. So let's talk about gas first. If you look at the gas reserves around the planet, they're pretty amazing. They're huge, right? But of course, the more difficult it is to produce it, the higher the gas price has to be before you do it. But just in America, in Canada, Mexico, and the US, you have enormous gas reserves. I don't see just about anybody being worried about running out of gas. And the same with coal. It seems to be so much coal that nobody's talking about peak coal in terms of production, right? It's more in terms of demand because you go to other energy sources. So I wouldn't be too worried, the way I see it, about running out of natural gas or running out of coal at the moment. That's how I see it. But again, there's going to be people on the other side of Scott Tinker maybe thinking otherwise, but that's how I see it. Yes?
You mentioned earlier that one of the biggest solutions that developed countries need to do to help our neighbors in developing their energy sustainability and their security is by providing aid and capital to these other countries.
Yeah.
The issue is that most of the countries that experience the worst of pollution are also countries that do not have a stable government or really any sort of semblance of a government whatsoever.
Yeah.
So how can we implement sending aid and capital to those countries if there's no system to receive it and properly allocate it?
Yeah, good question. I wish you didn't ask it. No, so there's a lot of literature on exactly that you have a nation that is maybe very corrupt, and the worry is that the money doesn't go where it should. But more importantly, I think, is that many wants to go into that country and put up not a coal plant with electricity grid and building that, but maybe find many villages where they want to put up photovoltaics, maybe 100, 200, 500 megawatts thing that can supply electricity then to 20,000 people living there, right? And then when they want to do that, it costs maybe $500 million, and investors are not willing to do it unless, for example, the US and Norway are willing to take care of the risk that the investor is facing doing it in that spooky country, right? So I think that we have to come up with ways, the rich nations, the OECD nations, have to come up with ways of financing that type of energy progress for people who don't have anything. And then nations need to kind of stand behind the risk of stuff not happening as it should, rather than you and me as an investor in that photovoltaic thing in that city. So that's what I think the first we can do, is to make sure the money goes to a solar farm, is being built, being inspected, the electricity comes on, and then the payback is maybe low, so the ROI is low, but if something goes wrong, then the nations are backing you and me who invested in it. I think that's the first one, really.
If I can follow up on that, doesn't that seem also, while good, also like another form of colonialism?
Yeah, in a way, but maybe we need to team up in that country with university students and PhD and local outfits. So I think we do it to be altruistic in one way. It's not going to be a tremendous ROI on it. And it's even better if we can do it together with somebody. But if we are the only ones with competence and experience, then it's hard just to send in a bunch of buyers and photovoltaics and say, okay, you guys do it. So I think local content, as we call it, is extremely important. That we help educate somebody where we are going, we take them up the learning curve, and they are part of the team, and maybe we can leave even once it's up and running. So I agree with you. Yeah.
So okay, I have a few observations about the questions that were asked and some comments, right? Well, one of the things about gas, by the way, we are not going to run on gas, right? Because I was involved in developing FLNGs, and when we were trying to develop these floating for stranded gas fields, because at a certain cost, certain gas fields are not economical to be developed. It's not that the gas is not there; it's purely. We probably have 100, 200 years of gas left at present rates of consumption, right? Similar to coal. Some of the more kind of difficult observations. One is if you plot the per capita energy consumption, which is very closely related to per capita GDP, right? There is a huge difference between one half of the world and the other half of the world. It's a massive difference. It's a magnitude difference, right? And the cost, even if the developed world somehow helps the developing world transition, the cost is so high that it's not going to punch the transition very much. The reality is it's trillions of dollars to bring the per capita, to produce the energy. It's basically capital investment, right? Developed world became what it was because of 200 years of capital investment, oftentimes related to colonialism. But whatever the history is, energy is fundamentally related to that because you need to invest so much capital in order to produce so much energy so that these people can consume it. The time is not there. the capital is not there. And that is also related to, if I kind of, be an astronaut, right? And think about the dialogue, not just within this country, but across the world. There is a high correlation between the lack of dialogue and this divide. And I don't see that being bridged in the next 20 years.
Right.
I mean, there's no practical way that I see that happening in the next 20 years.
Right. Something came to mind. When we had that big ozone hole in the 70s, and then the nations teamed up in something called the Montreal Protocol, and they made a bunch of stuff illegal to have in refrigerators and so on. And that apparently has actually worked, right? Now the ozone is doing fine. We're using something else. So there are a couple of kind of global agreements that makes me hopeful that we can kind of hold hands. But we have to see. All right, well, sorry.
I wanted to ask you a question about your view on hydrogen. So, most of the hydrogen that is produced now is from either fracking petroleum or from natural gas reforming. And what I'm wondering, there's a lot of, there's existing technology for watering the hydrogen, but it's expensive to get gas, basically power electrolysis. So I'm curious at the higher levels of management, Exxon, BP, are people really serious about looking at hydrogen as a way to transition between an economy where it's based on oil and gas to eventually one where there's renewable hydrogen and missing infrastructure? Also with respect to the fact that carrying hydrogen doesn't have the high like mineral intensity like you have with battery. It won't have some of the intensity of natural gas, but potential for being renewable. So I'm just curious, what are the conversations that are really happening at large companies about around hydrogen?
So again, you get almost that split that I showed you, the business as usual decarbonization. But let's take Exxon. They are really big on hydrogen. They think this is going to be used all over the place to make steel green, to make cement green, because we need those high temperatures to make it work. They even talked about maybe using it in power plants and to make ammonia, right? So the ships are running on that instead of on diesel. But many others, so Scott had a hydrogen person here and another one over here, they again totally disagree. Some say that hydrogen is so expensive and it takes so long before we can make enough green hydrogen, meaning renewable and then electrolysis to make it, that we're stuck with blue hydrogen. And then that's steam reforming, like you said, and CCS, and sending it back down. And they also say that the cost is so high per kilo, it needs to come down to, what is it, $1 per kilo, now it's 6, 7, 8, 9. So the green premium is huge compared to, actually that's a good picture for the green premium.
Yeah.
The black is about, so the steam reforming hydrogen now, compared to the one with CCS, is probably a $5 difference.
Yeah.
That you have to get down to get parity. Right? So some companies believe in it, others kind of dismiss it, that this is just a hype. You find 500 projects out there. The furthest along projects you find, I think, in the UK or in Europe. But those making the most hydrogen at the moment is Texas. I think there's more than 20 places in Texas because they're using the refinery. Yeah. So Texas has a lead on hydrogen. And if they want to kind of ramp up that lead, like Exxon thinks, then the US and Texas will be the leader in hydrogen. And I see here on campus, there's a lot of R&D and good stuff going on in hydrogen. But in my crystal ball, it will take a little longer, at least to get the green hydrogen, because you don't have to remove power. Yeah, thank you.
Last question. How has the recent success with nuclear fusion changed the conversation around nuclear energy?
Everybody I talked to say that was fun, but if you look at the energy going into generating a tiny bit of energy, we're talking 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, maybe never working. So that's on this side that Scott Tinker. On the other side, people are really excited. I think this could take off. But personally, just speaking for me, I think it's going to be, we have done so many other good things with energy by the time fusion is ready to do work, that I think we could be doing fine without it. But I think nuclear is now back in every nation. They're looking at it. And if I should not predict, but just guess, I think there will be more nations, going to classical nuclear, call it that, than what we've seen in the past with Russia and France and China maybe being the leaders, and also the US. But I think that one is quite far into the future.
An observation as well about hydrogen, right? The hydrogen and methane might be comparable in energy density, but I think the fundamental difference is that methane is extracted, right? Whereas while hydrogen is the most abundant in the universe, it's not extracted. It's not. You're not finding it straight from another, and it takes a certain. It goes back to the energy of producing hydrogen versus the energy that you derive from hydrogen. And that equation, which is why I'm quite skeptical of the amount of investment that's going into hydrogen now, because of that equation not quite adding.
So we need Scott with him on one side, and then Exxon on the other side, and then we have a good day. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming, everybody.